The elevator stopped on a floor that didn't exist. 43, the digital display read. But this building only had 42 floors. I stood frozen, my cleaning cart beside me, staring at the doors as they opened onto a corridor that shouldn't be there. A long hallway with faded gray carpet, dim light from half-dead fluorescent bulbs, and wooden panels from the 70s lining the walls. The air was colder here, heavier, smelling of rust and old dust. My name is Maria. I've been cleaning this Chicago skyscraper for 3 years, working night shifts to send money home to Guatemala to my 2 children living with their grandmother. In 3 years, I'd cleaned every one of these 42 floors, knew the layout by heart. 42 was the top floor with executive offices. Above that was only the technical roof. There was no 43rd floor. But here it was. I stood in the elevator with my hand hovering over the door close button, telling myself this had to be a system malfunction, a programming error, nothing more. Then I heard it. Soft tapping, like someone typing on a typewriter, rhythmic and insistent, coming from deep in the corridor where shadows gathered into darkness. Curiosity overcame fear. I stepped out carefully, my footsteps muffled by thick carpet, the tapping growing louder as I moved down the hallway. The first doors were locked, but through frosted glass I could make out furniture inside. Old wooden desks, high-backed chairs, even ashtrays on windowsills, as if time had stopped somewhere in the middle of the last century. The tapping came from an office at the end of the corridor where the door was slightly open, brighter light leaking through the crack. I pushed the door open and went inside. The office was furnished in 70s style. A massive wooden desk, a leather chair with cracked upholstery, walls hung with diplomas and photographs. On the desk sat an old typewriter, its keys moving by themselves, tapping out invisible text. But the typewriter wasn't the only unusual object in the room. Next to it lay a woman's purse. Brown leather, clearly vintage, with contents neatly laid out on the desk. Lipstick in a gold tube, a compact powder case, several coins, and a driver's license. I leaned closer to examine the document. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. The name on the license read, Isabella Martinez. Date of birth, June 15th, 1952. A Chicago address. The license was issued in 1977. Next to the purse lay a notebook, open to a page covered with neat feminine handwriting in Spanish, which I could read easily. One entry said they thought she didn't understand what was happening, but she saw how they changed numbers in reports, how the boss made secretaries redo documents every night, saying it was temporary, but she knew they were cheating investors. The next entry was dated November 3rd, 1978, describing how she saw them burn folders in the conference room, thousands of dollars just disappearing from reports. When she asked about it, he said it was none of her business, but if she stayed silent, she would become an accomplice. The last entry was from November 10th, 1978. She had decided to tell everything to the prosecutor's office. She had copies of documents. The next morning, she would go to the investigator. She hoped God would help her make the right choice. The typewriter suddenly fell silent. In the quiet, I heard another sound. Footsteps in the corridor, slow but approaching, and my heart began beating faster. I grabbed Isabella's driver's license and stuffed it into my uniform pocket. Instinct told me this was important, that this woman had tried to do something significant. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I rushed to the window where beyond the glass stretched nighttime Chicago, its lights twinkling from what appeared to be the 43rd floor of a building that officially didn't exist. The door began to open slowly. Without looking back, I ran from the office, raced down the corridor to the elevator where the doors were still open, as if waiting for me. I jumped inside and frantically pressed the first floor button. The elevator began to descend, the display showing familiar numbers: 42, 41, 40. When the doors opened in the lobby, the marble floors and modern lighting seemed like the most beautiful sight in the world. I ran outside, forgetting about the card I'd left on the 18th floor. Only on the bus ride home did I take Isabella Martinez's driver's license from my pocket, and under the streetlight it looked completely real. Faded and worn, but genuine. At home, I immediately turned on my computer and began searching for Isabella Martinez, Chicago, 1978. The result appeared almost immediately. A short notice in the Chicago Tribune archives from November 15, 1978, reporting that police were searching for 26-year-old Isabella Martinez, who had disappeared without a trace 4 days earlier. The woman worked as a cleaner in a downtown office center, didn't return home after her night shift, and relatives claimed this was not in her character. Another notice from December 20th, 1978, said the search had been called off and police had classified the case as voluntary disappearance. I sat in my small apartment, holding the driver's license of a woman who had vanished 45 years ago while working in the same building where I work now. And I knew that tomorrow I would have to go back there, because Isabella Martinez had tried to make the right choice, and perhaps she was still waiting for someone to help her make it. The next night, I returned to work with a plan: a powerful flashlight, spare batteries, and a phone with full charge. If the elevator took me to the 43rd floor again, I would be ready. At midnight, I called the service elevator and pressed the button for the 19th floor. The elevator rose. Then that familiar grinding sound came, and the display flickered and stopped on 43. The doors opened to the same dark corridor, but this time something was different. The corridor seemed longer, stretching further into darkness than I remembered. The doors on the sides were open now, and I could see inside. Empty desks, but the chairs were still warm, as if someone had just left. I walked directly to the office at the end of the hall, where the door was open, waiting. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The typewriter, Isabella's purse, the notebook with her final entries. But now I searched more carefully, because the message in her diary had mentioned having copies of documents. Where would she have hidden them? I examined the office systematically. Desk drawers empty except for old pens and paper clips, filing cabinets locked, bookshelves holding only dusty legal volumes from decades past. Then I noticed the paintings on the walls: landscapes, still lifes, portraits of businessmen in expensive suits. Behind me, I heard a soft sound, like fabric rustling. I turned but saw nothing, just shadows. When I looked back at the wall, one painting had moved. The frame depicting Lake Michigan at sunset now hung noticeably crooked, as if invisible hands had just pushed it. My heart pounded as I approached. The painting was still swaying slightly. Someone, or something, was showing me where to look. I lifted the frame carefully and found what I was looking for. Cut into the wall was a small niche closed by a metal door. An old-fashioned safe with a combination lock, the kind used in offices decades ago. I needed the combination. I returned to Isabella's notebook and flipped through the pages carefully, and on the margin of one page I found numbers scribbled in pencil: 15, 06, 52. Her birth date from the driver's license. I returned to the safe and carefully turned the dial. 15, 06, 52. The lock mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. Inside lay a thick folder tied with red ribbon. I carefully took it out and opened it in my flashlight beam. The folder contained copies of financial documents, bank statements showing transfers of investor money to personal accounts, fake profit reports where numbers had been changed by hand, correspondence with shell companies in the Cayman Islands. These were irrefutable proofs of fraud worth millions of dollars. But most important was a handwritten letter dated November 10th, 1978, the day before Isabella's disappearance. The letter was addressed to the prosecutor, detailing the financial fraud she had witnessed and offering to turn over all evidence in exchange for protection. At the bottom was her signature, Isabella Martinez, witness. But the letter was never sent. Under the letter lay a medical certificate from a local hospital dated November 11th, 1978, stating admission of an unidentified woman of Latin American origin with severe head trauma. The patient died without regaining consciousness. The body was cremated as unclaimed. My hands trembled as I read the document. Isabella hadn't disappeared. She had been murdered, her death presented as an accident with an unidentified victim. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My breath misted in the air. I looked up and saw her. Isabella standing by the window, her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. For 45 years, no one had known the truth. No one had cared enough to look. Until now. I whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you." She didn't turn, but her hand reached out and touched the glass, leaving a faint handprint that slowly faded. Then she was gone. At the very end of the folder lay a note written in shaking handwriting. If someone found these documents, they should know the truth. Her boss was a murderer who had stolen millions from innocent people. When she tried to stop him, he had ordered her killed. She begged whoever found this not to let him escape punishment. Her family needed to know the truth. The note was signed, Isabella Martinez, November 10th, 1978. I sat in that dusty office, holding evidence of a murder committed almost half a century ago. Isabella hadn't just witnessed financial crimes. She had collected enough evidence to put her boss in prison for life. But he had killed her before she could turn the evidence over to authorities. I photographed every document in the folder with my phone, then carefully put everything back in the safe. For now, it was better to leave the evidence where Isabella had hidden it. The typewriter suddenly started again, its keys tapping out a message I could read. Gracias. Thank you. Then it fell silent. Behind me, a phone began ringing in one of the empty offices. I stopped, turned back. The ringing was insistent, demanding. Against my better judgment, I walked to the open door and picked up the receiver. Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a woman's voice, distorted and distant. He's coming. Run. The line went dead. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran to the elevator, pressed the button frantically, and when the doors finally opened, I threw myself inside. As the elevator descended, I looked up through the closing doors and saw figures standing in the corridor. Dozens of them, all wearing work uniforms from different decades, all watching me with empty eyes, all waiting. The morning after I found Isabella's documents, my supervisor called. We needed to talk. At the office, 2 men in expensive suits were waiting, lawyers from a downtown firm. They fired me on the spot, citing fabricated complaints about my work quality, but then one of them leaned forward. We heard you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, studying documents you weren't supposed to read. My heart stopped. They knew I'd been on the 43rd floor. He smiled coldly. Immigrants have it hard here anyway. Would be a shame if you had problems with your documents, or if something happened to your family back home. The threat was clear. That evening, Tony, the night security guard, called. We met in a park 2 blocks away. They're watching you, he said, handing me a flash drive. Security footage from the last month. I copied it before they made me delete everything. He'd worked here 15 years, knew about the 43rd floor, knew what happened in 1978. Look carefully, he said. you're not the only one interested in this building's history. At home, I reviewed the footage. On October 23rd, 3 men in suits, including the lawyer who fired me, entered the building at 3 a.m. and took the elevator to the 43rd floor. They knew it existed. When they returned 2 hours later, one carried a red folder. Isabella's folder. But the most shocking footage was from 2 days ago. The same men went up again, this time bringing a small safe on wheels. They'd replaced the old safe with a new one, which meant when I opened it, Isabella's documents were already gone. The answer came with the morning mail. In my mailbox was an envelope without a return address, and inside was a photograph of my children in Guatemala playing in the yard of my mother's house. On the back of the photograph was written, "Beautiful children. It would be a shame if something happened to them." My hands trembled as I held the photograph. They weren't just threatening me. They were threatening my children. That evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at the photograph of my children, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You have 24 hours to decide. Call us or we call immigration." My hands shook as I set the phone down. I was trapped. Completely trapped. Then my laptop screen flickered. Once. Twice. The browser opened by itself. A page loaded. The Chicago Tribune archives. November 15th, 1978. Isabella Martinez's disappearance. The cursor moved across the screen without me touching it, highlighting a sentence. Relatives claimed this was not in her character. The screen flickered again. Another article appeared. Then another. All stories of missing workers. All disappeared after trying to expose corruption. All forgotten. The cursor stopped on one final sentence, highlighting it in bold. Her family deserves to know the truth. The screen went black. In the reflection, I saw her. Isabella standing behind me, her hand resting on my shoulder. Not threatening, comforting. When I turned, she was gone. But I understood the message. She wasn't asking me to risk everything. She was showing me I wasn't alone. After 3 days of hiding, I saw a news story about a journalist investigating mysterious disappearances of workers in the 80s. Among the photographs, Isabella Martinez disappeared November 1978. The journalist asked anyone with information to contact the newsroom. Guaranteed anonymity. An hour later, I called from a payphone, told her everything. The 43rd floor, Isabella's documents, my firing. We met at a crowded downtown cafe. I showed her the photographs, the security footage, everything. She studied the materials carefully. This is serious, but I need original documents to publish. Without them, it's just rumors. The problem, the originals were in a safe controlled by the law firm. They knew I knew about it. She smiled. I have an idea. The next day, she published an article about mysterious disappearances in Chicago. Historical investigation, no mention of modern events. But she wrote that she'd received information about evidence connected to Isabella Martinez's case and planned to involve federal authorities. The article was bait. That night, the lawyers took it. Tony called. They went to the 43rd floor, cracked the safe, destroyed the documents. But while they did, federal agents searched the law firm's headquarters. They found much more than expected. The firm hadn't just hidden their founder's crimes. They'd continued his work for 40 years, stealing millions through fake schemes. In the senior partner's safe, agents found Isabella's original documents. The company had kept them as insurance. The trial lasted 8 months, ending with the firm's liquidation, long prison sentences for all partners, and asset confiscation to compensate victims. But justice came too late for many. A year later, DNA analysis confirmed the unidentified woman from 1978 was Isabella Martinez. her family finally learned the truth. I stood at her funeral, holding white roses, thinking how one brave woman had changed everything. Almost half a century after her death, Isabella Martinez got what she'd fought for: justice. The journalist offered me a job as assistant in her investigations, especially cases involving immigrant rights and labor disputes. My experience as a cleaner and knowledge of Spanish turned out valuable. A year later, I brought my children to Chicago. And downtown, in that same skyscraper where it all began, there's now an immigrant assistance center on the 43rd floor. No longer hidden from the world, open to everyone who needs help. The phantom corridors became a place of hope, but sometimes, late at night when I work late at the center, I hear it. The soft tapping of a typewriter coming from the empty office at the end of the hall. I don't go to investigate anymore. I know what I would find. An old office frozen in time, and a woman who finally found peace. But the sound reminds me that justice matters, even when it takes 45 years, even when it costs everything. Last week, a new cleaner started working in the building, a young woman from Honduras. Yesterday, she asked me about the 43rd floor, said the elevator took her there by mistake. I told her to forget about it, to never go back. But I saw it in her eyes, the same curiosity that drove me, the same need to know the truth. The 43rd floor is waiting for her, just like it waited for me. And there are still others. Other floors, other buildings, other people who tried to do the right thing and disappeared. Their stories are still waiting to be told. Sometimes I wonder if she'll be the one to tell them, or if one day she'll become another ghost, haunting another phantom floor, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. The typewriter taps again, softer now, almost like a whisper. Gracias. You're welcome, Isabella. Some buildings never let you go, and I'm not sure I want mine to.